Hi there. Welcome back to the podcast. And wherever you may find yourself, I hope you're having a wonderful day. And I'm very excited about today's episode. Today is going to be the inaugural guest episode. And I couldn't be more excited to be having this conversation with my dear friend, Michael Spann. Michael is somebody who I played college basketball with. He was a phenomenal athlete. He's going to paint his achievements as an athlete very humbly in the conversation. However, I can tell you that this man was one of the finest athletes that I'd ever stepped on the court with. So that being said, today's topic about sports, what it is not a spitball conversation about what's going on in sports in terms of who's good, who's not good, what's the latest on this player or that player. The goal of this is to just discuss the idea of sport and the role it plays in our culture and in our civilization, and is something that I believe used to carry a lot more value in terms of what it gave back to the culture. What I'm observing from the outside looking in it is that the direction of sport is starting to move to where that value is no longer there, and therefore I would look at it and consider it to be something that is no longer valued. Now, what I really appreciate about this conversation is that Michael presents a little bit of a different perspective. I think that he is able to identify my bias, and I think that he's able to present points that I think maybe help bring some balance. So, in that light, I think it's a very meaningful, very matterful, very enjoyable conversation to have with a wonderful man who not only is a great athlete in his own right, but is a guy who has family members who are currently in athletics. He has done individual personal training with youth currently in the basketball world. He has been on the sideline coaching youth athletics before. And so he is somebody who I believe has a much better pulse on this than I do. And also, Michael, outside of my blood brothers, he is my best friend in the world. And honestly, I just wanted to do this first podcast with him because it meant a lot to me to do that. However, I do believe that he presents a perspective that really adds value to anybody who might have a listen. And so, again, as always in this podcast, I want to tackle some difficult topics. I hope that it can be something that is still encouraging, that is uplifting, that even if there is challenge, that challenge is value adding and not toxic. That in the end, hopefully leads to just some critical thought, better understanding of our own worldviews, which then in turn can reduce sensationalism and hopefully grow our respect and our appreciation for our fellow man, whether we agree with them or not. Which I think in the reality of the polarization of our world today, it's just a good thing. And praying for peace on earth and goodwill toward all men. So if you've taken the time to stop by, thank you so much. I hope it's a benefit to you, and enjoy this episode with Michael Spann. Thanks. What is your worldview? How does that worldview shape and form your understanding of meaning? In this podcast, we discuss various matters of interest and value. But in the end, we want to know the deeper meaning of these matters and how they apply to the world around us and to ourselves. My name's Jonathan. Join me as I search out deeper meaning and understanding into the matters at hand. Thanks for coming on, brother. I appreciate you. How's life in general? How's the world spinning? What's the word with the sports is the topic of the day? What's going on with the Kentucky Wildcats?
Well, the Kentucky Wildcats have been, they've been inconsistent this year. They have not played to the standard that the Big Blue Nation has expected Kentucky basketball to play with, but they had a huge win last night. They played Arkansas, which is their former coach, John Calipari, and they beat the Razorbacks in Fayetteville. The first loss that Arkansas has had at home. I think the first loss in 17 games going back to last year. So no, it was a huge win. Big win for Mark Pope. I think it kind of was a statement win for him, especially after losing last year to John Calipari in Lexington. So yeah, they've won 5 out of their last 6 after losing the first 2 SEC games. So hopefully they can finish the last month of the season out with a bang.
Is Arkansas ranked?
They're 15th. Yeah.
They're 15th. Okay.
Yeah.
Dude, have you ever seen, so there's a couple YouTube channels. Have you ever seen SEC shorts or, it's this guy named Matt, but they drop during the football season, they drop 2 to 3 minute videos, sometimes a little longer than that, 5 to 6 minute videos. And they'll drop them at the end of every single week during the football season. And virtually they're just talking about the SEC teams. and they're talking about the games, and they're kind of really, really funny, and they're really comedic. Have you ever seen any of those?
I don't think so.
I'm gonna
SEC
I'm gonna s
Shorts?
Yeah, I'm gonna send them to you. One's called SEC Shorts, and they are like when, when Vanderbilt had won, I think it was last year they beat Alabama, right? And, well, the guy who runs SEC Shorts, he did this really fun viral video where he put a crown on the Vanderbilt guy's head. The Vanderbilt guy broke out of a casket, and he had like a king's robe on and a crown, and they dropped the thing, and he was just like walking around like he's the king of the SEC now, and it was viral.
Pavia? Diego
Um,
Pavia, the quarterback?
no, this was the guy in the SEC Shorts who just runs the films, and it
Dude,
was popular.
I
And
think I actually did see that. I think someone sent me that, as a matter of fact, at work.
yeah,
I think I saw that for
well,
some
that kid
reason.
was on. Yeah,
Sounds
he
actually
was on
very
Game Day.
familiar.
Yeah, when Game Day was at Vanderbilt this year, he was on it. That kid who did the crown thing, he went up and he put the crown on Nick Saban's head and stuff. It was hysterical.
Yeah, I feel
But
like
this it
that sounds familiar. That actually sounds familiar.
Yeah. Well, as an SEC guy like yourself, you might appreciate it. I'll send it to you. So,
Yeah, yeah, for
um,
sure. I mean, the SEC is kind of I think the benchmark for college athletics right now as far as the standard goes. I
you could
mean,
if you were
let me just say this. But and I'm sure maybe you'll get to this, but the Big Ten with Indiana football right now, that may be changing. So
we'll see. I mean, I live in Indiana, but couldn't no offense, could care less. So
so you
when it
didn't care
comes
at all when Indiana won, like you weren't excited at all when they won.
no, because no, because Notre Dame, like Tulane and James Madison. I get it. Like I understand, and we can. I mean, dude, this even touches it. The whole point of our conversation about do sports still matter, right? Like you think about the money, you think about everything that's involved, especially for some of those kind of lower level mid-major D1 schools who are like, hey, the millions of dollars that come in by being able to get into the college football playoff. I'm like, man, like we got to I don't even would Indiana be the national championships if my beloved Irish had been given a shot to put up their Dukes in the college football playoff? I don't know. So no, I was not overly stoked about Indiana winning the championship.
Was
And
Matt? Can I ask you that? Was Matt excited?
but
Okay.
I would not be surprised if he was pretty stoked.
Yeah, yeah.
But I
That's
haven't
a good
talked
point.
about it.
Yeah.
I don't know. So, but jumping into the topic today. So in the podcast, you and I have talked about, like, I want to take topics and I want to assign meaning and matter to them, almost like a philosophical approach when we're thinking about topics. And I know it may be a little bit, a lot of the episodes that I've done up to this point kind of hint a lot at history and looking back at, concepts in the modern day that can be connected to the past. And really, you could do that with sports too if you wanted to. So, number one, thank you for being my first guest on the podcast. It meant a lot for me to do that with you. Just for any listeners, Michael's my best friend. We went to college. Outside of my blood brothers, he is my dearest friend. And he and I have known each other for years, and we played basketball together in college. And we did a run at doing an interview last a couple weeks ago, and oh man, it was an unmitigated disaster. The my microphone wasn't working. I had things screwed up. I didn't know what was going on. And had I had maybe a stranger on or somebody who I didn't know to come in and to do an interview, it would have been catastrophic. It would have been awful. So, but he was there, laughed through it with me, helped me to learn. So, you know, praise the Lord for friends and for community and for great people that are there to help you. So Michael helped me kind of learn the nuances of doing a guest episode. So it just means a lot for me, for him to be the first person to kind of touch into a topic like this, like sports. And that was a huge part of both of our lives growing up. And so, Mike, what I want to do is I want to kind of get your background, just kind of working our way through your story, and then also working your way through just kind of how you would assign meaning to sports in terms of that experience. And then we can branch off and let the conversation goes where it will. But my kind of question that I wanted to present to you is through this episode is, do sports still matter? Because I feel like, there's got to be a balance. Like toxicity in sports is not new. Like that was there when we grew up. That was there in high school athletics when we were growing up, middle school, youth athletics, obnoxious parents. Like none of that's new in sport. However, does the kind of progression that we see in sports today, are the negatives and the toxicity levels exceeding the benefits of that character personal development element of sport? However, I feel like that balance is kind of shifting. That's my opinion, but that's why I wanted to talk to you about it today. So, Mike, what I want to do is kind of give me the rundown on your past in athletics and just kind of along the way, what are things that stuck out to you in terms of your experience? What are things that you feel like, hey, when I look back and I think about meaning in sports, these things stick out to me. So just kind of, I know that's a broad question, but I just wanted to open the floor to you just to give your background to just kind of start filling in the blanks in that.
Well, John, when you asked me that question, I was immediately, I thought of the old legend in Hollywood, Kevin Costner. And if you recall, Kevin Costner played in a baseball movie in the 90s, and it was called For the Love of the Game. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but as far as my origin story goes with sports, I think it's rooted in really that, like a natural penchant of competition, of wanting to somehow work out extrinsically what was inside of me. And I think that when it comes to sports, athletics, certainly, parents can kind of thrust that on kids, and they do. And I don't even necessarily think that's a bad thing. Parents wanting their kids in youth sports to develop camaraderie, you know, team building, practice, discipline. I think that can be a good thing, even if that child is not necessarily given to athletics, just many aren't. But I think those who stick it out do so, at least initially, because they love the competition. There's something about the sport that draws them in. It's something like they feel like they were in some way made for, whether it's that a specific basketball, baseball, football, hockey, soccer. There's something in that competition they feel like, at least I did, that was a part of how God made me. And so I feel like my personal origin story, I remember, of course, having two older brothers, and you have an older brother. We both were beneficiaries of someone kind of going before us and showing us, hey, look, like I'm watching my two older brothers do something that is very intriguing to me. And so it was very easy for me to assimilate myself into the sports athletic realm because I had two older brothers who were into that themselves. And my dad was too. I mean, he played sports growing up and played in high school and played in collegiately as well. And so for me, it was very organic as far as my proclivity to sports, even though I did feel like, and still do, have a natural like just draw to that. And so I played baseball growing up, and that was my first sport as a 5-year old or 4-year old. Maybe I started playing baseball, and then slowly when I was probably 7 or 8, started really loving basketball and played that. Youth sports, played it in middle school, played it in high school, played collegiately with you. Played football growing up as well until I was 15, and I gave that up to really focus. I gave baseball and football up to focus in on basketball in my high school, and I was successful. Had a successful high school career, and uh, I think a successful college career as well. But um, for me, and I'll just add this as a caveat, what began to really create, I don't want to say a problem, but a crisis, I guess you could say, for me when it came to athletics, is when I began to impute my identity and how I felt about myself according to how I performed. And I think that as sports becomes progressively more performance oriented, meaning if you perform this way, then you get this sort of reward, right? I mean, we're seeing in college athletics, even high school athletics now. If you play this well, if you're this good, you can get money, endorsements, all this different things. So obviously kids and youth see that and are drawn to that. And I know for myself personally, I remember in 8th grade when I was so invested. I basically, I remember putting this in my locker at school. Like every game I wanted to score this amount of points. And if I didn't score this amount of points, I felt like I failed. I felt like I wasn't performing well. And so that really created within me a performance-based identity that if I didn't score, if I didn't perform a certain way during a game, then I felt like I was somehow not achieving uh, the identity that I felt like I needed to establish and I wanted other people to see me as. So anyway, that was something I worked through, and honestly, it tainted the love of the game for me. Now, it didn't diminish my passion, it diminished how much I wanted to excel and succeed, and in certain ways, it propelled me to work harder. But it certainly tainted it in a way that I know, Lord willing, when my kids grow and as they, I'm sure, play sports, I'll be sure to have them not focus on that element, even though it's so difficult. So
Can I ask you a question
I'm going
about
to
that?
stop right there. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, so what I wanted to ask you is as you were navigating that, that tendency to wanna try were there any leaders or any mentors in your life who you went to or who noticed that in you and kinda helped you kinda pull that back and restrain that? Was there any, like, leadership or mentorship inside of the sports community that helped you, "Hey, man, like, stop putting up points in your locker and getting so worked up about it. Just go out and play your game," right? And see, was there anybody like that in your life who you could either bounce that off of or observe it?
Well, no one knew. That was
Oh,
I
okay,
kept it pretty private, and
gotcha.
so no coach knew. And and honestly, uh, and this is no fault. I don't blame them. I don't look back at some of these. I had some great coaches growing up. I had a high school coach my senior year who I loved. I even had my high school coach. Both my high school coaches were I had great relationships with. Um, but there were a few who did some things that weren't helpful in my development, and I think obviously there were some things that manifested in high school specifically when I began to excel and put up points or whatever and become successful. I think there was also like an element of like, hey, Michael seems to be like wanting to get his, so to speak,
Mhm.
at the expense of like maybe the success of the team. I know there were certainly like was I drawn to that a little bit? Absolutely. I'm not gonna say I wasn't. I mean, I wanted our team to excel, but there were some coaches, one coach in particular who said something that actually was pretty damaging to me in the moment. And I look back, and again, I'm not like blaming him. He was, a younger guy, and just said something, it was immature of him to say. And so again, I don't blame any coach. I don't blame, you know, I developed that on my own volition. But when you ask that question, it would have been so helpful to have someone to just be real with and to feel like I could be real with and talk. And again, like I was, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old. So,
Mhm.
I wasn't reflecting and being introspective and like, how can I flesh this out with an adult or with a coach? It was kind of a thing I wanted to keep hidden, to be honest. Um,
Yeah.
but I don't want to get into specifics of that specific coach. And, I'm just using it as an example of, you know, this coach said something that kind of affirmed this belief that like I kind of had about myself. Like, am I really selfish? Am I really like all about me? And he said it publicly in front of like other players. And it was like, man, it was hurtful, it was damaging, and it's to a certain extent. Um, but at the same time, like it, I don't necessarily think it was untrue to a certain extent of what he said, and maybe that was why it was so hurtful. And and so yeah, but having someone at that time who could have come by me and been a little more, I don't want to say therapeutic and like I needed a therapist, but someone who's like, hey, look, let me be real with you right now. Let me kind of shoot it to you straight, so to speak. Would have been helpful for sure. And I will say, my senior year, I had a coach who, I feel like was brought there by the Lord, and who I am so grateful for. Who did honestly, like I remember he told me at one point, Michael, to whom much is given, much is required. He said that to me before my senior year started, and that's of course from the Bible. And he really kind of helped me. I feel like come to a place where I was like, man, I respect you as a coach. I
Yeah.
respect you as a leader. And so my playing was not a lot of it was geared towards like I want this guy. I want to succeed and excel for him as well. And so it did help, man. There was and anyway that I'll answer that question. Did I answer it the way you
No,
wanted me
yeah,
to?
no, that was perfect. That's great. It's
Great.
exactly what I was hoping that we could kinda gear towards. There's such a nuance to the balance of sport of performance and the personal and character development side. what I wanted to kind of get to in kind of today's topic is that that tension's always existed. Now, when you're a professional athlete and you're a professional coach, that bias is completely leaning towards performance because if you don't, you're going to get fired. And in today's culture, it's going to be within 2 to 3 seasons you're gone if you're not performing. So the highest levels, there's an element of understanding behind that. But what I'm kind of interested in getting at is I feel like when I grew up, the bias towards character development was still enough to where it balanced out that maybe potential toxicity from a performance perspective. Because performance in sports a reality. Like it has to be a part of it. That's one of the reasons you do it. And it's not a bad thing because when you get into the professional world and you get a job, what are you expected to do? You're expected to perform in your job. Hey, this is what's required and expected of you. And I expect you to perform in that way. And if you don't, there's consequences, remediation, practice to get better. And if you continually show a pattern of not being able to perform at the level that is necessary, they go and they find somebody else. So there's real world implications with performance. So you're not going to do any good for anybody, especially young kids, teaching them not to perform. That's a part of it. However, when that's all of it, which is kind of what you got at for yourself individually and internally, it gets out of whack. And so what I think is I feel like there was a good balance between the performance and the personal development side because they're kind of complementary in a way. However, I think with the way that we're trending, especially with the capacity for individual athletes to build a brand for themselves in a way that was non-existent when you and I grew up. I mean, you could just simply point to social media. I feel like that performance to character development is starting to bias far more towards performance to the point to where it's almost kind of starting to nullify the value of sport in general. Now, I don't have any kids in sports, so you yourself have coached. You yourself have, family that that's in sport, and I have great friends who have young boys in sports right now. Do you agree that that's kind of the trend or the trajectory of sport in our culture, or would you disagree and say, yes, it might be like that in some areas, but by and large, as a whole, I don't feel like that imbalance is really taking place.
Mhm. I think it's so tough right now not to be drawn into uh, a metric of, judging one's success or judging one's value on not performing well. I think it's very difficult just because, let me say that. And then I also say, obviously, there's still a place for personal development. I think a lot of times it's dependent, and I'll harken back to what you asked me previously about, was there a coach or a mentor or a specific coach who kind of helped you navigate through some of the things you were struggling with? I think a lot of it is contingent upon good leadership. I think with anything, in life, if you have a good leader, a good uh, mentor, someone who's, showing, because, I mean, kids right now, and as you well know, I mean, how difficult is it for a 13-year-old who's going through all sorts of changes hormonally and, things at home? There's a lot of tons of things. I'm just using that as an example because that's the adolescent phase. You're kind of transitioning from childhood to adolescence to manhood. Or, and you can even talk about females because obviously they have, but I think both of us are coming more from a masculine perspective because we're guys and we can more empathize with our own gender. Um, it's tough to navigate how you're feeling about things, and we're all trying to draw value from something. I think every single person wants to feel valuable, and I don't want to get too in the weeds. We want to focus on sports here, but I will say this: I think just in life in general, people are trying to like find some place where they have their niche, they have their value, they feel like they're integral to some part of life to exist. And sports is a way to, I think, cultivate that in a positive way, but also it's a double-edged sword because then uh, it's so easy to measure success in sports because you win or lose, right? Then when you get older, stats are so available now. Stats have always been something that's been like big in sports, but now it's like you have all sorts of analytics now where you can judge basically everything you do on the court, your plus minus in basketball, how successful the team is, there's just tons of things. So I think it's increasingly becoming more challenging as technology, as things become more accessible, with just stats in general because I mean, even now, like in middle school and high school, you have, I mean, recruiting is starting earlier and earlier, so people can like look at their like, am I ranked somewhere? Do I have my own recruiting profile? Oh, I have this Huddle account where I can put my highlights on. Who's looking at my highlights? So it's so what is happening now is in sports, unfortunately, it's increasingly becoming more about how am I viewed? How am I perceived? And what better way to look at that, in people's minds is, what are my stats like? How many points did I score? What are my highlights looking like? You have Instagram, you have Facebook, you have TikTok, you have all these different social media platforms now people can post. So it's like, you know, and I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's bad to do that. It's because it's fun. It's like you like to share that with your friends, but it's just you're starting on a trajectory right now in youth sports where it's almost impossible to focus more on the development of, hey, how can I be more of a selfless teammate? To how can I, work on certain things in sports that's going to have a positive impact on things I do outside of athletics, because so much of athletics has become uh, the immediacy of success. Like, what is this doing for me right now? It's it's tough for. I think it's increasingly becoming. Well, let me put it this way.
Hmm.
I think in certain ways, kids are actually working harder maybe than ever before in a certain athletic. I think you're seeing kids start earlier training and training's accessible on YouTube and different social media platforms. That's really cool, right? Like when we were growing up, we had to like buy videos, to watch homework videos with Pistol Pete, and we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have social media to like
Yeah.
look at hey, how to do a crossover, how to do, a Euro step, how to do a pro hop, all these different things. And so in that regard, like I do think they're starting earlier, but like, what is the point, I guess is what I'm saying. Are you training earlier? Are you working harder because you're just enjoying it, you love the sport, you love just like growing and learning, and or is it like I've got to do this because I want to get to a certain point. I want to be able to perform at a certain point. And if I don't perform at this level, if I don't get this type of like success, if I don't get this type of attention, then I'm a failure. So I think that's kind of like the balance right now. You're seeing maybe hard work, you're seeing personal development, but, what's the impetus behind that? And, I think
Kinda
again,
like
leadership is so essential to hone that and to make sure,
yeah.
people are staying grounded.
So kinda like when you say impetus, you're kinda like the motivation behind it. There's no longer a not so I wouldn't wanna say no longer because that's a very sensational way of putting it. That gives like a universal feel to it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying like there can be kind of a new trend away from kind of the motivation for the team, for the crew, for to where we're talking about developing an individual brand for yourself that is enough to garner the attention of quote unquote the customer, which is gonna be recruiters, which is going to be virtually the business that you want to become a part of. You're building that brand in a way to where it's almost superseding the idea of almost kind of the communal element of it, right? Like, so let's kind of take this turn and think about it like this. So I feel like one of the primary benefits of sport is community. That's what one of the benefits was for me, and not specifically growing up because I dealt with a lot of toxicity. I didn't realize it at first. That's why I have a leaning towards sports not mattering as much now as they used to, because that was probably my experience. So I think it's good to number one, identify my personal bias, which I think you have a little bit of a different and more healthy perspective than I do from your upbringing, which I think can help maybe bring some balance to my thought process on it. And so I see community as value. And what is one of the primary things about community? Think about Sebastian Younger in his book Tribe. What does he talk about in that book? If you're an effective part of a community, you are giving to the community more than you're taking from it. Because if you are taking more from the community for yourself than you're giving back to it, you then become a liability in that community. You're no longer adding value. You're a detractor, not a value adder. And so I feel like when we were growing up, there was that kind of drive, even though it was subconscious and they used different words for it, team first, like it wasn't about building a personal brand. It was about adding value to the team or the community more than you were taking from the team or the community. And do you feel like this transition of, hey, it's not just about who this young individual is as a person, their skill level that they've clearly demonstrated in the film and what their team and their community says about them? It's, hey, we can look at the data and the numbers at an in-depth and paint a picture of this athlete before we even meet him. So do you feel like that element that you've kind of referenced is starting to supersede the community focus of what athletics used to be to a bigger extent, to where what you talked about, individual branding, is now more important than the community or the team? Do you feel like that is something that we're trending towards?
Mm, yeah, it does. It's a good question. I think human beings, we all have a natural inclination to, again, want to feel valuable and want something to like affirm us. And so then, as you know, specifically because we're talking about youth, I know we're also drawing out a broader application as well, but it's so tough for someone who is younger, who's underdeveloped, who's still in middle school or even high school to understand the implications of what you're talking about. It's like that's why it's so incumbent upon people who have a little better grid of like a macro view of what's going on
Mm,
to be able to cultivate. Look, guys, um, I know how easy it is to be drawn into this like focus on self and focus on furthering your brand and furthering your clout. But until you understand like the and you mentioned communal, just the selfless element that athletics can cultivate, or the selfish uh element it can cultivate,
yeah, it's a good
if you're
point.
not like consciously aware of that. And I think all of us have, like, there's not a person, I don't think there's a person who's played athletics who wasn't like, who didn't have an issue or who wasn't like drawn to the selfish element. But that's why it's like we have to be consciously aware of like, and I do think psychological, I do think one of the things that I do think is a positive development in sports is the psychology of sports now. You're seeing more people kind of do studying the psychology of approaching sports, approaching athletics, how to better work on. But I think that can be a double-edged sword as well, because again, is it all about the self? Is it all about how whatever I can do to further my brand? If it can, so to answer your question, I do believe it's become more self-focused of furthering one's brand as opposed to furthering the communal element for sure. But I don't think it's necessarily foreign to people who played basketball or football or baseball now than when it was 60 or 70 years ago. I think every human being has a natural propensity for that, for that self-centered, self-focused, self-cultivation. The difference is there are more tools right now that are more accessible for the human being, for kids, for high schoolers, for, even college athletics as well, college athletes, to begin harnessing and cultivating the self-focus element as opposed to what it was, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So I think that is like, and it's tough to navigate because again, I don't, you're not going to be able to take that away. You're not going to be able to take social media away. You're not going to be able to take away, uh, all the different applications kids can use now, or athletes can use to further their brand. And I'm not saying you have to do that, but that's what I'm saying is like it's so important to have someone in a leadership position, a coach, a mentor, a parent, obviously, who's consciously aware of those tendencies, and to be able to really hone in on their child, their player, uh, their those who are they're mentoring, to teach them and kind of admonish them and to exhort them to know how to be aware of these things, and to also kind of paint them a more macro view of it. Say, look, the more selfless you can be, the more you can love people around you, the more you can be a leader and you can serve, that's actually going to, and I don't want to say further your brand, but it's actually going to make you more successful. If you do the things that are selfless, if you love, if you serve, and that's a broader application than just sports, but sports is in really ways is a microcosm of just life and relationships. So again, that's why I think, having someone who can like cultivate that with these kids, with these athletes is so imperative, because they have so many things thrown at them, and they just, name me a 14, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old who knows how to navigate all of these things and to balance them out and to be introspective about them and to consciously say, "Whoa, look at all of these extrinsic things that are acting upon me to try to draw me into this self-focused, this value system based on my success, based on my performance, and to view that and to say these are acting upon me right now. How can I metabolize them in a way that's not going to damage and be adverse to me?
Yeah.
And I think it's very tough. That's why you need someone again to help them sift through that and to cultivate a better perspective on how to be more selfless. And you mentioned communal, however you want to describe it, uh, and assertive in building this rapport with your team. So that's what I'd say to answer that question.
Yeah, and I think that, one of the things that you've gotten at on multiple occasions, and you've referenced this on each point, because I think that as I've listened to you respond with it, it's making more sense to me now. I think you're helping me get clarity in my own mind of wanting to do one, because this topic that I brought up, it's not something that I have an answer for, right? I just think that, as somebody who is a huge fan, specifically, I'm a huge fan of the NFL. I grew up in Indianapolis. I love the Colts so much, and I love watching them every week with my son during the NFL football season. I just think it's fun. um, you're helping me kind of see with a little bit more clarity than I otherwise have, because I have a very strong bias, in my opinion, to this question. And so one of the things that I think you brought up is it's I think that I'm looking too much at the reality of how the things that are now available are magnifying something that you have said already pre-existed before these things came to light, right? So the ability to personally and individually build a brand and market yourself has never been greater than it is now. That same desire to build the brand and market yourself as an individual athlete, that's not new. And that's kind of the point that you made, right? You're like, hey, that's been around. I mean, you could probably find graffiti on walls in ancient Rome about gladiators or individuals competing in the arena who, they had fans outside the arena, right? So individual marketing of oneself is an ancient thing. So I think that what you're saying is hey, the means by which to do that has kind of risen to new heights. And so what's essential to balance that out, because like you said, that's not going anywhere. And so what's essential to balance that out is leaders have to understand that this has increased, and therefore the level of leadership has to increase with it, or else it'll throw off the equilibrium that allows sports to be a value adder in our society rather than a detractor. So when it
Okay.
comes to that, do you feel like that's a fair kind of summarization of kind of the point that you're trying to get at when it comes to leadership? Or would you add anything to that or take anything from that?
Yeah, I think what you said about athletics being a value adder to our culture than something that's going to cause more uh, adverse results is a good way to put it. And I'm sure it's more nuanced than just saying leaders have to be more consciously aware of how to
Okay.
cultivate, an awareness with their players, parents, obviously as well, with their children. Certainly, there's more nuance to that, but I think at a very foundational level, it's so imperative for the coaches, the leaders, the mentors to lay a foundation of look as you're building because foundations are so important. It's like certainly you can tear down a foundation and put a different foundation in, but it's very difficult. It's kind of like what Yoda said to Luke. It's like you must unlearn what you have learned. And that was very
Dude, that
important,
was money.
right? And so what's that?
That impression was spot on. Well played, old boy.
Was it decent? Okay. But
Please carry on. That was wonderful.
so,
Thank you.
hey, thank you. So I think in many ways that's true. It's like so that's why building a foundation with kids when they get into athletics and parents are obviously, I mean, that's the foremost,
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask you.
foundation builder.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask you about this too, is you're kinda going, do you feel like that this leadership is more incumbent? I know that it's a balance, but would you say that it should be more incumbent on parents, or on coaches? And obviously that's heavily nuanced too, because there's gonna be a lot of young athletes who don't have active parents. And so should the primary influencer be the home or should it be the coach? What would be your opinion on that?
Well, I think that if the home is stable and there are parents there that are again aware because I think some well-meaning parents are just not aware of this, and some well-meaning parents are so invested in, like, kinda living vicariously through their children, they totally forget, like, this isn't a science experiment. You're not just like, this is a real, living, breathing human being who God's created, who is very influenced by things you say, by the actions you take right now. And so it's just it's more of a, "Hey, man, this is an exhortation to parents." So, yes, to answer your question, yes, parents are more incumbent upon them. It's more imperative for them to build that foundation, but obviously, to your point, there are many kids who come from broken families, who don't have a parent, who don't have someone in their life who's gonna, you know, teach them the fundamentals and a good foundation of how to approach their given sport. So yeah, then the community at the community level, their youth coaches, and that's tough. I mean, it's tough for anyone to be because I think we're so entrenched right now with success. We're so entrenched in sports with the metric of how well have you done in the immediate, you know. But to just try to like bring in more of a micro view on this is the foundation of kids playing sports and what most important, what their tenets are. Yeah, dude, it's like if a parent is not going to be doing that, or at least if they're not aware of the implications, and it's not like, and hear me out, I'm not trying to be like super ominous about this, like this is a huge issue, but it's just something to be aware of.
Mhm.
And because kids are so impressionable, and if you can cultivate, hey, look, and there's more to say than this, but like this is not life or death here. Like
Yeah,
your
that's a great
value
point.
does not come from your success, how many points you score, how well you do today. It's like if you can ingrain within them, I think Tim Tebow is a great example of this in the way he played the sport. It's like, man, he just played with heart. He played with vigor. He played with selflessness. He played with love for his teammates, man. Like, I plan on telling my son if he ends up playing sports, you know, love your teammates, man. Love them, serve them, be a good leader. Like, think about how you can just like make their lives better on the court, on the field. And if you work the hardest at it, if you play the hardest, if you work, you're going to be successful, regardless of the metric, regardless of how many points you score, regardless of how many goals you score, regardless of how many touchdowns you score. It's like, I think if we can pull back that person, I can just speak for my personal desire, is to pull back the metric of if you do this on the court, on the field, you are a success, and instill within them a more, if you can love your teammates, if you can serve them, if you can show them, uh, if you can illustrate to them your work ethic and how hard you're approaching this sport, how hard you work, that's a far better metric to judge one's performance than a stat. And I think just me personally, I think that's a very foundational thing to ingrain within those kids from an early age. And
Yeah,
they're always going to be drawn into this metric of statistical based performance as a value.
yeah,
But if we can continue to try to like get them to deviate from that more, I think the more successful they're going to be and the more enjoyment they're going to have and the more and probably, John, to be honest with you, kids usually flame out because their parents prioritize a metric of success and tell them and they just can't achieve it. So they end up feeling like they're a failure and they flame out. Their passion's lost. And so the longevity of them playing sports is very transient. So instilling a foundation, a good foundation of how to approach the sport will most likely give them a more enjoyable, a more fulfilling, and a longer duration of success in that sport, to be honest.
yeah. I think about the nuance of leadership, like you said, when it comes to coaches. My experience growing up was that the leader I did not realize until I got older, till I got out of college, and I had the opportunity to be around some of the greatest leaders that I think exist. Um, when I looked back at my athletic upbringing, specifically through middle school and high school, and I look at the leadership that was demonstrated in athletics when I was growing up, it literally made me laugh at how much of a joke it was, and then vomit in my mouth of how impactful these individuals' actions, clear favoritism, easily manipulated by parents, you know, doing things like changing a coach at the middle school level for a specific group of kids coming up because they didn't want that coach to have any influence on this specific group of kids who they thought were going to be, the next greatest thing. Like that's the level of toxicity that I'm talking about. That makes at that level for a bunch of below average athletes, none of whom can play college basketball for the most part. It's like that was an experience I had growing up. I think about what we're dealing with from a cultural influence on sport, and I realize, hey, if the leadership that I experienced growing up is still kind of par for the course for leadership in sport, that doesn't bode well, which is why I have a little bit of a bias, I think, towards not seeing sports progression in a positive light in our culture. And so I think to myself, hey, with my children, I'm going to go back to sport that kind of was what it was in the ancient world leading up to the now, which is, sports historically used to cater more towards the martial. And when I say martial, I mean like warfare. It was based upon skills that would have leaned towards application on the battlefield, running, throwing, strength and wrestling, combat sports. There's a martial component to that. So nowadays, I kind of look at it, I'm like, okay, if I'm a parent and I want to put my children into something where they're gaining lessons and they're gaining things to where even if there is a toxic culture to it, the individual skills that they're learning are going to carry value for them outside of that. So I think about something like wrestling, I think about jujitsu, I think about, even mixed martial arts. Yes, there's going to be high levels of toxicity inside of those, just like there would be in football, basketball, or baseball. However, when you get out of football, basketball, and baseball, even though there might be some nuances that you take out of it, the skill that you learn in basketball doesn't carry over into the world. However, the skill of jujitsu could be the difference between you protecting yourself from somebody or not. The skill of mixed martial arts could have an application of you protecting your family someday when you're walking down the street and you run into some, unfortunate situation. And so that's kind of the way that I think about it in my background and my upbringing when
Mm.
I kind of look it is sport is becoming a lot more it's becoming a lot more dynamic and being able to shepherd it and guide it and steward it in a way to where it remains healthy, I think is something that's very difficult. And I have a really negative perception of that because of my upbringing. Now,
Mm.
looking at that kind of idea as I present it, would you kind of encourage me to think, hey, it's not as bad as you think? Or would you agree with me that trending in a way to where it's going to be out of balance?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good insight on your end, and I
And it
do
can be
think
a
it's
bit of an
important
unfair
for.
question because, like, you don't know every single community across the entire country. So I'm not trying to tell you to give this, sensationalistic response. I just think that, you have experience. You've coached youth athletics before. Like, you have family
Mhm.
members who have athletes right now. So it's like, I think that you have a little bit of a better pulse on it than I do. So
Yeah.
I would just be like, what would be your response to my perspective? Would you say, hey, I feel like you're way too biased? Or would you say, hey, I think that you're onto something. You need to chill out. Or would you say, hey, man, like, you're dead wrong. Like, what would be kind of your response?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I can just say that I know I made mistakes, in my when I coached middle school. I know there were instances where I I was thinking of a time where I told this kid who was the best player on our team, I'm like, "Hey, man, go drop 25 today. Drop 25, man." And I was doing it, in a fun, encouraging way, but at the same time, I look back, I'm like, "Well, I was just giving into that very thing that I'm criticizing right now."
Hmm.
Um, so, man, to answer your question, do I think that you're maybe a little too jaded and your bias is maybe you're extrapolating that and applying it to the whole rather than looking at it from more an isolated perspective? I think yes and no.
Mhm.
I think both things can be true in that your experience does indicate something endemic within youth sports, within sports in general. At the same time, I also think it's true that there are plenty of great youth coaches, middle school coaches, high school coaches who are doing a good job in cultivating and teaching and instructing and building teamwork and building, enduring values within, a sport that maybe is not as applicable as you mentioned to like, using a skill to defend your family.
Mhm.
I think that, jujitsu, mixed martial arts, for example, there's certainly you can I don't disagree that learning that those skills can have a great application to life. At the same time, I could also we could also talk about some adverse results of of those types of, if you want to call it athletic or athletics, or I don't know what you call I guess mixed martial arts would be a
Yeah,
sport,
yeah, that's fine.
certainly.
No, that's a fair
It's
point. Yeah,
competition. So yeah, I think the most important thing, or one of the most important things, is just to be aware. I think my brother does a really good job, and obviously, he's still navigating himself. But I think how invested he is with his kids. I don't. There may be a certain level of distrust he has with youth or with the youth organization. That's why he's so involved. But he is so involved with his kids. He's so involved with, especially as they're young and as they're playing. He's so involved with them. He's very aware of what they're experiencing, very perceptive of what's going on with them. And I think we can't. I think we can be too sheltering and too overprotective and trying to protect our kids and trying to protect people that we love in life, and we're giving them a distorted view on what life is. And life is working through challenging circumstances, navigating through adverse conditions. And I think we're not simulating real life with them if we're trying to, like, I think there is a level of protection too. More than that, I think, look, first of all, it's like, what is your kid into? Like, what is he drawn to? What's she drawn to? Like, I don't want to force feed anything. I mean, sometimes I think it's good for us to have, like, hey, try this out and see how you like it, of course, as a parent. But I think if anything, man, it's like what I say to you, what I say to myself, what I say to anyone who feels like there's value in athletics, whatever it is to just be aware of being aware of okay, what is my kid feeling right now? Like, how are they feeling about this? Like, also being aware of, like, hey, maybe I can invest and help coach or help be a part of this sporting, venture they're engaged with. And I think my brother Benj does a good job of that. I think he's very engaged and he's not doing it perfectly, obviously, because he's a human being. But I do think there's value in just being aware of what your child is doing, how they're engaged, where they're plugged into. And then, I would say again, like, there isn't a one size fits all for each kid, obviously, because I know for myself, I have no idea ultimately what my kids, and obviously one in the oven right now,
yeah,
what they're going to be naturally inclined to. You know what I mean? Like, I don't, but I do know that I want to be very aware, very invested. And ultimately, I can't control wholly on how, especially as they get older, what their coach is going to be like. But I certainly can be invested, and I certainly can do my part in giving. 'Cause I think, John, I'll end with this. I think if, as parents, we can build that foundation that's like rock solid. Obviously, like, they're still humans, so they're going to struggle. But like, if there's a foundation that's built, it's like, even if there's a coach who maybe isn't as, on the level we feel like they should be on, we've
uh-huh,
still, like, can trust that foundation we've built with our children, to be able to withstand maybe a circumstance that may be adverse in the moment. And I think that can be
fair
a
point.
learning
Yeah,
moment too. That can be a learning tool, obviously. Does that make
great
sense?
point. No, that's great. It's almost like the importance of the parental leadership of moms and dads to be able to be like, hey, listen, here in the next 10, 15 years, when you're in the professional world, you're going to constantly find yourself in difficult positions that you just can't walk out of because your responsibilities require you to remain faithful.
I can think of a situation that we both encountered in college where we had a challenging situation with a leader in our lives. And both of us, I think, can acknowledge that the way we approached it in the moment was not the best approach.
No,
And we
deeply
both look
personal.
back
Yeah,
on
they
the
are.
situation like, man,
Yeah,
we should have done this differently. And I can just speak
yeah.
for myself.
No, me
I
too. 100%.
remember, and it's like, certainly you can look back in that moment and be like, could we had a a mentor in our lives that would have helped navigate us through this, that would have, or a different coach that wouldn't have put us in this position, whatever. That's irrelevant, because what we both learned, at least what I've learned, and it's been really applied not just in athletics, obviously, but just life in general, is that there is someone in your life, like a leader, for example, or someone that is very close to you, that, like, there's a fundamental issue you have with the way they're doing something. And I'm talking about something that, like, escalates to the point of you needing to tell someone who's an authoritative person over them. Of course, it's unethical and something that, like, I would advise someone, like, if you're dealing with something, like, if a coach is doing something unethical, immoral, obviously you tell someone above them. I'm talking about more of a personality conflict, coaching conflict, whatever. But what I learned was, man, I never want to go over a coach's head or an authoritative figure's head before I approach them and at least give them the opportunity to respond to my grievance.
Mhm.
And I've learned that, and tried to apply that in life, in my jobs, and people I interact with. And obviously, it's not perfect. I haven't perfectly applied that, but I think you can kind of extrapolate that and apply it to just even our kids and other kids being in adverse situations. It's like you're going to be in situations in life that they're going to try you. That, like, you're not going to have a good boss. You're not going to have a good leader in your life. What, are you going to avoid that, and not because you're afraid of potentially what the outcome may be, rather than, okay, how can I approach this situation with discernment, with awareness, and with clarity? And I think both of us, and I can speak for myself, learning from that experience, I can also share that with my children
Mhm.
and continue to try to apply that in my life, and also instill that within them. That wouldn't have been there had I not had someone that I had a, categorical issue with,
Yeah. No, and I remember that situation, man, and number 1, I remember just having so much regret in my personal approach to that because I failed, like 100% failed. And, I was young, I was stupid, I was immature. And, obviously I learned a lot from that, but also I got out and I got into a position of leadership at one point, and I had heavily invested in this follower that I had, just like our coach had invested in us. And this individual, like, just cut the legs out from underneath me. And when I experienced that, when I had my own experience of having people who followed me not directly come to me and talk to me about issues that they had, but rather, and this individual didn't go above my head. It was more nuanced than that. But this individual guillotined the legs out from underneath me, which is like, when you think about a guillotine, that's a horrible analogy.
Yeah, well, that's
But
it's actually paints the picture pretty
but
clear for
yeah,
me.
it makes, but the point is that when I experienced that, I then had another element of regret stacked on top of that, because I was like, not only did I make that mistake, but now I know what it feels like. You and I are both agreed. I remember that situation. I learned a ton from it. However, you hate to learn lessons at the expense of others.
Yeah.
And, like, that's not ever what I wanted to do, obviously, at the time. But I would go to say this as well, like, that is one of the elements that I think that you can take away from something like sports, that, does give value to it, is that, even though I would prefer not to have lessons like that be learned, I think it's an analogy and an example of the fact that there are a lot of lessons learned when you are a part of a team, when you are a part of, a community of sport. And I think that that still retains its value even today. I'm glad you gave that example. I think it's a great analogy too, that, there's also, and this is, I want to make this point and then I want to bring up kind of one final question or topic, but, and then we'll close things out, is that and this one point is that there is still, even when you're talking about a 14 or 15-year-old kid, there is a still individual responsibility on the part of the athlete. Like, even at a young age, that's not nullified. And so I think is that as I think about, do sports still matter? I think I'm on the fence. I think that talking with you has helped me not be as extreme in my bias, and it's kind of helped me balance a little bit. But I think we live in a culture to where, we don't want to consider people able to navigate the world by themselves until they're in their 20s. And Alexander the Great, I don't give a crap if he was trained and led and raised to be able to be a battlefield leader. Like, I don't care. The fact of the matter is that you had a kid who was 18 years old leading the Campanian cavalry on the flank at the Battle of Chaeronea for Philip of Macedon. An 18-year-old kid leading the charge of the Campanian cavalry. So we can't act like 14, 15-year-old kids are completely ignorant and unresponsive. When my
Mhm.
son is that age, there's going to be an element of responsibility associated with that. Like, he's not immune from the situation. So I think that when it comes to this, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, that everybody's aware of that quote. And I think that I would still apply that in sport today, is that there still is the responsibility of the athlete. It's like, hey, there's more than enough information out there for a 15-year-old to know, hey, social media can be a bad thing if I don't use it in the right way.
Mhm.
So I feel like what we've talked about is like there's this huge ecosystem that really has to balance itself out. And what I wanted to talk about is I feel like something that's happening at the higher level of athletics that I really want to pick your brain on as we kind of close this out is the idea of the NIL in college, specifically in college football. And, that equilibrium that we're talking about of athletics at the youth level that kind of has to have the balance of good leadership and coaching, the balance of good parenting in the home, the balance of individual responsibility by the athletes. Like all of these things have to be working together for it to be a really strong positive for the culture. And let me do the very quick example of Dabo Sweeney about 2 weeks ago, did an 18-minute press conference, and he released the tampering of a player that they had at Clemson. So in the end, Clemson went into the portal. They signed a linebacker. They recruited him, got a verbal commitment, and then they got a signed commitment from that player. He was a part of the program, signed on the dotted line, was in classes, and then he started to receive text messages from Ole Miss and the Ole Miss head coach saying, hey, what's your buyout? And this is an individual technically, quote unquote, under contract to play for Clemson. And then he leaves Clemson, a place that he is committed to, goes to Ole Miss. I mean, that's the equivalent of an NFL player signing with the Colts. And then after he signs, shows up to the facility, starts working out for the Colts. The new coach of the Texans sends him a text message and says, hey, come on down here and we'll pay for your buyout with the Colts. That doesn't happen. And so what I'm trying to say is I look at that situation as a whole, and as I look at the realities ethically of what's taking place there, it is an absolute complete lack of integrity across the board, with the exception of Dabo Sweeney and Clemson. The player is showing a lack of integrity. I don't know what the involvement of the parents are, but if the player is doing it with the understanding of the parents, there's a lack of integrity from the parents. There's a lack of integrity on the part of the coach from Ole Miss who's texting that player to come through. But what I wanted to give to you is kind of a last question, just to kind of see what your thoughts are. Is it used to be college players are trying to compete to make big money in the NFL. And you can apply character development in the NFL all you want. Everybody understands one thing: it is about the money, period. Now we see college and kids in high school, they can now compete for multi-million dollar contracts in college. Now, granted, that's a very small majority in the NIL. I know that most players are not making that much money, but hey, $500,000 to play football in college? Like, dude, you and I remember going to CC's Pizza, man. I would have bought the CC's Pizza if I had $500,000 in college, and we would have eaten pizza forever. The idea of that now being the case, what does that mean now for high school athletics? Is these kids and their parents and their families are like, hey, you can make 500 grand when you get up there. So, what I wanted to put to you is, do you think that something like the NIL, the lack of integrity being shown in it, do you feel like there's the potential for a trickle down effect that can kind of really impact and start throwing off that equilibrium down at the kind of the high school, middle school, youth level? Do you think that stuff trickles down to that level? Or do you think that that level's relatively immune from that just because there's so few athletes who have the potential to even play at that level? And I already see, sports at the lower level is kind of teetering on the edge of no longer being valuable, and is NIL something that can, like, push that over the edge? What do you think?
It's almost like, I guess, the analogy of dangling the carrot in front of the rabbit. It's like, I think it really, we can harken it back, and there's a nexus to what we've already spoken about in terms of what your question is. Let me just say this. This is kind of philosophical, but I believe this is true. I believe this is biblically true, is that all of us have the capacity to do and to be something horrendous. I think it's very important
Mhm.
for us to understand, by the grace of God, we're not that, you know?
Yeah.
And so I'm going to draw an analogy here in a second. So it's important for us to understand that all of us have a propensity to want to do things that are selfish. But I think what is happening, and I'll apply this principle to college athletics, and then ultimately kind of what you were mentioning with middle school, high school sports as well, and youth sports, is that so what NIL has done, I don't think in and of itself paying someone because ultimately these college athletes are, their performance is garnering tons of money for the university and for the NCAA. So in a sense, it's like I don't fault them for wanting for even like the athletes getting paid. I don't fault them for wanting that. But what's happened is you begun dangling this carrot now in front of them. It's almost like you put no parameters up at all with what's going on. And so
Mhm.
now the incentive for every kid playing in college or ultimately aspiring to play in college is, well, how much money can I get now? Like that is the objective. It's not school spirit. My priority is not to further this university's motto, their objective to further this fan base's desire for national championships or for success. It is, and again, it's because, again, when you start dangling a carrot in front of the rabbit, when you start putting things in front of the student athletes in college, that's going to pull out a inclination in them that's not like a wholesome desire. It's not surprising what ensues are things that would happen with Dabo Sweeney at Clemson and Ole Miss. It's like,
Mhm.
you know, and so they've opened up the can of worms, but there's no guardrails or parameters to ensure there's some sort of integrity and purity with the sport. And so obviously it's going to have a trickle down effect. How could it not?
Yeah.
These college athletes are the ones. I mean, think about us when I was in middle school, when I was in elementary school, even in high school. You see these guys that you want to emulate that are at the level you aspire to be. And so, of course, it's going to impact the sport because when they see these guys in college getting paid because of their performance, and maybe it's going to incentivize guys to play harder in college because it's basically an NBA player playing their contract year. Their contract is going to be up this year. They're up for an extension the following year. Oftentimes, you see athletes, their best year in sports is the year before they sign their contract
Yeah. Yeah.
because they're playing for that next. So each year, basically, these college students, these college athletes, if you want to call them that, uh, are literally playing for their next contract. And so that mentality is going to trickle down to these kids in high school and middle school because they're going to see that. They're going, oh, dude, this guy just like signed with this college and has this endorsement. There's rumors they got $2 million at NIL. And I'm using an extreme example because most people don't get $2 million. But it just furthers the idea and the principle of the immediate success, the immediate result of NIL. You do well, you perform well, you immediately get a some sort of tangible benefit from that.
Mhm.
And so obviously as in high school, middle school, and you're seeing high school students right now, John, you're actually seeing high schoolers getting NIL money. There are reports of that. I think in Missouri as an example, there are students who were like in high school signing NIL deals.
Wow.
So again, it's just without guardrails, without parameters, you're sticking the carrot in front of the rabbit, and it's just getting bigger and bigger. And I think ultimately it is having a deleterious impact on younger kids. Um, and we'll see how it looks. I mean, like who knows how it's gonna develop over the next few years. But as of right now, it's certainly I don't think been beneficial at all to the sport to sports.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your insights on that. I looked at that situation, man. The end result now of what happened with that linebacker from Clemson who left and went to Ole Miss is that he is now making more money for breaking his word. I'm like, what are we doing? Do we live in a culture where you make more money for breaking your word? What is going on right now? And when you think about it from, the perspective of my podcast and what I want to do is I want to assign meaning to things. There's no meaning in something to where in that you get paid more money for not doing what you say you're going to do. There's no meaning in that. So it's like it's so hard for me to look at that because man, I am a living, breathing example of how wonderful sports can be. You're my best friend. Your brothers are two of the finest men I've ever known in my life. I think about Matt, right? 10, like, just, like, almost makes me cry thinking about him. Like, because when I moved to North Carolina, when I lived where I lived, the only reason I found housing, the reason I found it was because of my friend. He took great care of me there, man. I think about Dusty, I think about Pat, I think about Brett and Brian, like, just freaking phenomenal human beings who I love so much, and, like, if I didn't see one of these guys or talk to them for a couple of years and I saw them tomorrow, it would literally be we like a week had passed. It wouldn't matter, and that's because of sports. Like, I have all of these relationships because I spent years of my life playing basketball, and I'll tell you this, I had some bad experiences growing up when it came to youth athletics and growing up through middle school especially. But I wouldn't trade it for the world, for the friendships that I now have in my life because of sports. So, like, I look at it now and I'm kind of seeing culturally how it's going off the edge of no longer being as valuable or matterful as it used to be. However, I bear the fruit of it every day in my life with the friendships that I have and that I hold. The first 2 guest episodes of my podcast are going to be with my friends that I knew from playing basketball in college. Like, it's like, so I guess the reason that I care enough to do a podcast on it is because I bear the fruits of the benefits of it, and I don't want that to be lost. And when you have athletes making money to break their word, I feel like we're trending in the direction of losing that. And I would hate for that to happen. But, that's more of a kind of a, I'll go cry in the back room here in the next 5 minutes after we get off this. But just kind of to close it out, man, Mike wanted to say thank you. Thank you for doing the initial podcast recording with me a couple weeks ago. That was an absolute disaster. Thank you for being, just such a wonderful friend. Thank you for chit chatting about this topic that both of us, as our kids grow up, will probably be dealing with this in real time here in the not too distant future. But just, hey, so I like to close the podcast out with just kind of one general question for you. And that is there anything from, like, a book you've read, a hobby you have, or just anything in general that you just kinda leaving this on a high note, be like, "Hey, if anybody listens to this podcast, check this out. This would be worth your time."
Well, I would say that there is a book I've been slow and steadily reading called Dominion by Tom Holland, not the actor Spider-Man Tom Holland, a different Tom Holland.
Dude, the historian, I'm so happy you brought his name up, dude. He is awesome. Continue.
Yeah, yeah. So the book Dominion, it talks about how Christianity has played a major influence in the world, specifically Western civilization, and it goes through a very expansive history of that, spanning from the ancient Greeks to current day. And I think I think if you want to learn just how impactful, because let me put it this way: if you're a person of faith, if you're a person who believes in Jesus Christ, we oftentimes we see the Bible, we see the apostles spreading the good news, but we don't really realize how we got from that point to where we got today, right? Like, how have we gotten to a point where Jesus Christ is the most talked about person, the Bible's the most read book, when it started really from, many would consider during the ancient Rome, from a small sect of like criminals, bandits, people who were, marginalized. How did it get from that point to all of a sudden the most popular religion, the most popular book, the most popular figure in the history of the world? And so it talks about how we got from that point to how we got to this point today, and to the the messiness of it all, the beautiful elements of it. And I think he paints a really good picture of the impact and how we got from, again, that place to where we're at today.
Well, Tom Holland's an absolutely phenomenal historian. And so this book, I think it'll be a value add, and I'll post a link to it in the comments, and then I'll also put up a little picture while you just gave that lowdown of what that book is, and I'd like to pick it up myself and read it. So, hey, Mike, I love you, man. Thank you so much, and I appreciate you, buddy.
Love you too, brother. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
See you, buddy.
See you, bro.